Stan, thank you so much for your time today. There are so many things that I'd love to discuss with you. What is the expression? You know more than I could ever forget, something like that. But the point of it is, what I wanted to talk about with you today relates to Joule and Joule 2, and specifically something that you speak about with real force in Big Vape, which is the Netflix docuseries about Joule, in which you appear and Dorian and I appear, among many others. And you are, in the docuseries, you make a very strong case against what you knew Joule had potentially the ability to use at that time, which was its Bluetooth technology. And Bluetooth technology, and specifically in Joule, is something that the company in its new iteration has applied for FDA authorization for Joule 2 using Bluetooth. So I wonder if you could just tell me why that would be alarming. Why is it so dangerous, as you said in the docuseries, that Joule potentially was going to use Bluetooth technology, and now, years later, they're running around screaming that the use of that Bluetooth technology will help protect kids from getting access to Joule?
So as we discussed in the Big Vape documentary, several years ago, when Joule was really starting to get beaten up for all of the kids they were attracting, I, along with some of my colleagues at UCSF, had a meeting with Joule's leadership where they said, we have this great idea. We can sense where the Joule device is, in particular, whether it's inside a school or not, using a technology called geofencing. And we could remotely disable the Joule device so kids wouldn't be able to use it in school. And isn't that a great idea? Because the problem of kids using Joule in school is a big, huge problem.
Wait, wouldn't that be a COPPA violation, Children's Online Privacy Act violation, by the way?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. To me, the thing that is scariest about that is the fact that the Joule device can sense where it is and communicate in two directions with the company, and the company can remotely control the device. And while this is being presented by, or was presented by Joule as something benign, where they could disable the device remotely when people or when kids had it in school, it also means that Joule has the ability to remotely monitor the device. That is, how often it's being used, how hard people are sucking on it, what kind of flavor and pod they're using, how frequently they're puffing, how deeply they're inhaling. And all of those measures of the actual product use are what are called smoking topography. And by manipulating the smoking topography, you can control the amount of nicotine which is delivered, and so the addictiveness of the device. And this would allow Joule, at the level of individual people, individual kids, individual adults, to know exactly how they're using the device, how they're dosing themselves, and they could remotely control the device by varying puff intervals, by changing the temperature of the coil, by all kinds of things, in order to manipulate the nicotine delivery in a way to make the product even more addictive than it is, to ramp up people's consumption so they could sell more Joule pods. And I think that would just be a disaster. And to understand this, you historically, you have to, if you go back and look in the tobacco industry documents going all the way back to the 60s, when the tobacco companies first developed a very sophisticated understanding of nicotine addiction and how you could manipulate the nicotine delivery in a cigarette in order to maximize the addiction. What the companies had to do, and they spent huge amounts of effort on this, was they figured out that you could change things like the kind of tobacco you use, the additives that you use, how densely you pack the tobacco in the stick, what you did to the paper that was rolled around the tobacco, all kinds of other things to control on a puff by puff basis the nicotine delivery. And different brands and brand varieties of cigarettes were located on a spectrum of nicotine delivery, and where they could kind of bring people in with a relatively low delivery cigarettes that were easier to smoke and move people up to higher nicotine doses and more addictive cigarettes. And the industry spent years and years and years perfecting this technology, but it's fundamentally an analog technology. And you can't customize each cigarette for each person, and you also have to be able to get people to shift from one kind of cigarette to another. By having two-way communication between the Juul device and the company, they can do that kind of individual customization at an individual basis. And the information that they're collecting about how frequently people use the product, how they puff on it, how hard they draw, how often they puff, what the nicotine dose is on a puff by puff basis, that allows them the information they need to customize the product person by person to maximize addictiveness, which would allow them to sell the most product. And I think they're presenting this to the public and to the FDA as a great thing in a way that they could somehow control youth use. But the capacity for this two-way communication between the device and the company, where they're sensing details about the device and able to feed back and control the device, it's immensely scary. And it's a little bit like a cross between Facebook and the Medellin cartel.
Wow, I just want to repeat that. It's a cross between Facebook and the Medellin cartel.
Right. You have all of the privacy problems and manipulation, a highly customized manipulation of individuals. But instead of promoting kind of an addictive behavior, which Facebook is trying to do, they're actually manipulating the delivery of an addictive drug. So it's even worse what big tech has been doing in terms of addicting kids to big tech. And the thing is, Juul is not the only company that has this capability. Philip Morris's IQOS is capable of two-way communication. And I'm pretty sure all of the modern e-cigarettes, or if not all of them, most of them, have or could easily have this capability.
Including like Views, the tobacco flavored Views that was authorized?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. You'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure. And I mean, when Philip Morris was challenged some years ago about why do you need to have two-way communication between the IQOS device and then sending things back to the consumer, which means they also have access to the device, they said, well, we want to be able to email people and tell them when they've used up all of their little heat sticks, the little mini cigarettes you put in these heated tobacco products. And it seems to me that, these things come in a box, and the typical consumer would know when the box is empty. So there's no need for this two-way communication and having Philip Morris monitoring the use of the IQOS just to tell people that, hey, you've used up all of your heat sticks, when it's obvious that they have an empty box. So, this is, I think, an important sleeper issue that's just not gotten enough attention. And the limited attention that it's gotten has focused on sort of privacy issues.
Mhm.
And, whether or not they're collecting data that would be useful in terms of marketing the product. And I mean, that's also a very, very important question.
Mhm.
I think the ability to remotely control the device and to manage the topography of the use of the device on an individual pup by pup basis is even scarier. And I think that what the FDA needs to do is just issue a guidance saying they're just not going to approve two-way communication between any tobacco product and anybody.
So, but what if they already have? I mean, then
Well,
what?
they have no, FDA has authorized products that have this capability.
So what would be the reason for them to do that? I mean, I just want to repeat for the
The
second
reason,
time.
I don't understand the question.
Well, I mean, so
What would be the
you're saying,
reason for them authorizing it?
no, no, no. I just want to repeat again, Facebook meets the Median cartel, because I hear you. I mean, a few things. One, that Jewel told you that they had this technology, but they told you at the time, this would have been 2018, right? They weren't using it, correct?
Well, no, they told me they didn't exactly say they weren't using it. What they said is, we could do this. What do you think this would be a good idea? And
Right.
I said no.
Okay.
Now, I don't know what they were actually doing at the time.
It does make you wonder how they knew they had a problem with youth use. I mean, I've heard them say, talk about, well, there were kids calling from high schools asking where they could buy Juul. I don't believe that personally, but I do know.
Well, I mean, the fact that there was a huge youth problem with Juul and a huge problem of Juul use in the schools with kids doing it in the back of the classroom or in the bathroom, that was common knowledge. I mean, it was in the news. I mean, you'd have
Right. Before it was in the news.
anybody paying any attention to Juul at the time knew about that. So
Right.
the fact that Juul was aware that it was a problem isn't surprising. The thing that shocked me was that they were presenting this, monitoring where the product is and remotely enabling and disabling it based on where it was. I mean, that is a level of intrusiveness that is just amazing.
So a couple things. So one, I had looked back and, there was this pilot program that Juul announced when they were getting all of they were getting beaten up by people like you and moms like us for, youth use. And they announced that they had this verification program that they didn't use the word Bluetooth, but in lots of the articles and places where they talked about the Bluetooth technology, they then piloted a program, I think it was in Atlanta in 2019, I believe, where they were using this special verification technology. So one question, I guess, is if Juul thought that this was such a great way to keep kids away, why wouldn't they have proposed in their original PMTA for Juul, which is still in abeyance until FDA comes back and either says, yes, we're going to stick with what we originally did before Juul sued us and we agreed to put it to the side, which is deny. If it was so great to protect kids, why wouldn't they have suggested this in their original PMTA? And then number two, why now, so why now are they saying this will protect kids if they could have done it before, if they were piloting the same kind of technology in 2019 and they didn't file their application until like later that year. So they obviously had the ability to do it. That's one question about Juul specifically. But the second question is why, it seems so obvious what you're saying. Why allow these companies to control the product that that you're buying? Why give them the opportunity, given the long history of the predatory behavior of the tobacco industry, which we have seen yet again? Why would FDA even consider authorizing a Bluetooth product? It doesn't make any sense. So why?
Well, to take your second point first, I agree with you. And FDA has just been asleep at the switch on this issue. If you read the guidances that they put out on PMTAs, there's a very brief mention of software, but it doesn't go into any kind of specifics. And if you read the marketing authorization, what are called the tobacco product lead summaries for the products that they've authorized, they're, as far as I can remember, they're silent on this issue. And, I just think that this is yet another place where the major tobacco companies are just so far out ahead of the FDA, and they're just running circles around it. I mean, if I was Brian King, if I was the head of the Center for Tobacco Products, I would be doing a very thorough investigation of the implications of this two-way communication capacity and remote control capacity of the devices. And I would take the position that that unless a manufacturer in their application can put forward quite compelling information about how this actually makes the device less dangerous and what kind of safeguards are in place to keep it from being used for the kind of remote manipulation that I'm talking about, that the FDA should just, as a blanket policy, say we're not allowing this. It's a little bit like the position they're kind of backing themselves into on flavors. They're basically saying we aren't making a blanket ban on flavors, because if they did that, they would get sued. But they're saying we're not going to authorize any flavored products unless there's very specific and compelling information that particular flavor is appropriate for the protection of public health. And so far, none of them have been. And
well, that's the regulatory standard.
To me, this remote monitoring and control of these electronic nicotine delivery systems is even more dangerous than flavors.
In terms of addicting kids?
Everybody, not just kids, everybody. They could, by monitoring smoking topography, they could manipulate that to keep young adults and adults addicted and to escalate their use. And it's just not, giving the companies that kind of data and that kind of control over the device is just completely ignoring this extensive history of industry research on smoking topography and efforts to refine the design of analog cigarettes in order to maximize addiction. This just goes way beyond anything that they've been able to. I mean, they put a lot of effort into this in terms of analog cigarettes, and this is just going to a whole new level. And I think the FDA just needs to put its foot down on this. And
is there anything in the law or the regulations rather that would require that? Because as you said, the standard is the products have to prove, the companies have to prove that their product is for the protection of public health, right?
Right. Yeah, there's nothing in the law that specifically deals with this question.
But there should be, is your point.
Well, I think the law, it's not a problem with the way the law is written. It's a problem with the fact that the FDA, if they are paying substantial attention to these questions, certainly hasn't made it publicly obvious.
So, as you know, we're a parents group, right? We're always thinking about how is this going to impact youth and how is this going to impact the ongoing addiction of youth and the initiation of youth to these products. And we have focused on flavors. And I just heard you say, and I want to repeat it again, that you think this is even more dangerous potentially than flavors, which has been the focus of our advocacy. So what would you
Right. And I'm not saying flavors aren't important.
I
I
know.
think that the work that PAVE and others have been doing to try to get rid of flavored tobacco products that's probably the most important thing that's going on in terms of reducing youth use, and probably one of the key reasons that youth e-cigarette use is now down some. So what I'm saying is, I think the long-term potential for damage that comes with this ability of the companies to remotely control the devices is even more dangerous than flavors. And I think that the level of concern and attention that the public health community, the policymakers, and that the FDA needs to devote to this issue, it needs to be a lot higher than it is right now. And I think that, the FDA needs to, demonstrate to the public that this is something that they're seriously looking into, that they're understanding it in the historical context of the manipulation of tobacco products to increase addictivity, and to keep the companies from taking advantage of, of kind of taking this huge wolf and putting it in the sheep's clothing of some way to protect kids.
Okay, well, we've got our work cut out for us. It sounds like we've got to, as what RJ Cutler, the director of that Big Vape, said, that when we've discovered Juul was going into schools, it, quote, awakened the sleeping bear of American mothers. So it sounds like the mama bears have to be focusing. I mean, that is what you're saying, that we have to elevate the noise and the concern, because that's not being communicated. I haven't really heard anyone communicate it with such fervor and specificity as you did in the documentary. And that's why I wanted to have a follow-up conversation with you as part of our work on the conference, because I don't really hear people talking about it.
I think among the advocacy groups, PAVE is the only one that seems to be paying any attention to this. And I think it's great that you're interested in it. And I think that this is something that's just, even though the capacity has been there for a while, we're now finally seeing the companies using it or beginning to use it. And of course, they're going to proceed very gingerly. But this is something, like the FDA let the whole e-cigarette epidemic get going before they, finally got serious about trying to deal with it. And that's making it so much harder to deal with today. And we're kind of at the same place with this Bluetooth. And I don't think it's so much the Bluetooth as the ability for two-way communication and control of the device. And that's just come to the fore, and they need to put an end to that before it gets as out of hand as flavors are.
Wow. Well, listen, Stan Glantz, we always appreciate your wisdom and your commitment and your prescience in all of this. You have both the past, the present, and the future right, always in front of you at all times. So I thank you for sharing this. I think it's a really important issue. I'm really grateful that you've raised it, and we will do our part and try to elevate it, because for you, of all people who have so much knowledge of the industry's predatory behavior over more than one generation at this point, over many years, decades, for you to see this as the two-way communication, we'll call it Bluetooth, but it's more specific than that. I understand the distinction. For you to say that this is as concerning as flavors, that is terrifying. And that means we really have to motivate and activate and push back, because we still have over 2 million kids who are, regularly 25% of those vaping on a daily basis. So we can't allow this generation to go off into the sunset of their young adulthood addicted. That's what the industry is always trying to do. They killed their first set of customers. They're harming the next set, and they're always looking for the next group of lifetime customers. So thank you, Stan, for everything.